Do we have a cold open?
No, I didn't even think about that. Tune in to hear a man talk about a man talking about a man talking about leadership.
Welcome to It Doesn't Take a Genius.
Ramsey!
You're going to let that fly, aren't you? Okay. Hey, how you doing, Marshall?
I'm doing great. The amount of show prep, stunning in its detailed level of sophistication.
Oh boy. Hey, can I tell you about a man?
Please, is he
I'm a man.
is he
I'd
an
like to
old dead man?
very much so. Very
Okay,
much so.
those are the best. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. The longer
Um,
ago they were, the smarter they were.
that's typically how I find it. And so this is a man who told me about another man, but I really just I want to get ahead of myself. So I have to tell you about the man first. So Hilaire Belloc. Do you know the name?
Yeah,
Hilaire
he was
Belloc?
the villain in the Indiana Jones movie who
Stop it.
kidnapped Indiana Jones's fiance.
That is incorrect. He is a fascinating man. He escaped as a baby, I think. He escaped from France with his family and fled to England during the Franco-Prussian War. So this is in the 1800s. Settled in England. As a young man, he wanted to keep his dual citizenship, so he actually went back to France to do military service. So he was a soldier in I think, an artillery regiment in France. And he, back in England, fell in love with this American gal who came visiting with her mother and sister. She went back home. He followed her. He figured out a way to follow her and basically spent all of his money making his way across the country like he was hitchhiking. He was doing sketches and poetry for people on his way to make his living, and connected with her, and she basically they couldn't get together because the mother wanted the girl to go into a convent, and later on they reconnected and they got married. I think they had 4 or 5 kids, and she passed away in her 40s, and he wore mourning clothes the rest of his life, lived into his, I think, his 80s. But during all this, graduated from Oxford, was president of the Oxford Union, was elected president, so he was sort of head of the debate society, served in Parliament, and wrote many books, works of art, etc. Engaged in many public debates, some with sort of a friend and sparring partner, George Bernard Shaw, the playwright who gave us Pygmalion, which is what My Fair Lady, the musical, is based on, and was a close friend. I don't know if this means anything to you, Mike, but he was a serious Catholic and was a close friend of G.K. Chesterton, who in my circles is revered as a just an amazing Catholic writer and speaker and thinker. But all of that to say, Hilaire Belloc was a leader, and in Oxford, he studied history. He was a historian who studied leaders. And so in my in my the kids that I tutor are reading a 1950s Latin textbook, and it has a quote from him on a book from 1933 about the Duke of Marlborough, John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, who was truly a Marlborough man. I want to say that. And anyway, Marlborough died in the 1700s, but he had the honor of having never lost a battle. So a number of battles, the War of Spanish Succession was, I think, the main war he was in. But I don't know enough about him to say much. But he basically never lost a battle. And so in this book, Hilaire Belloc gives this wonderful description of what a real military commander, a truly good military commander, what makes him. What are the things that make him? And I've got 4 points that I wanted to talk about today. So that's a long-winded setup, but I just wanted to explain. We're talking about a man who studied great men in history, studied leadership, wrote a book about a great man in history, and I have this quote about what does leadership really look like from his perspective. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
I share a lot in common with Mr. Belloc. Every girl that I ever went out with, their parents wanted her to join a convent. So I got that going for me. Yeah, that happened a lot. So
That's
uh,
that's
I'm,
fair. That's
I'm
fair.
excited to hear. Yeah, somebody who is a student of leadership. Yeah, what did they believe the four main points were?
Yeah, so and I'll give you the first three briefly. He says a general commander is concerned with three separate departments of military activity: strategy, tactics, and organization. So we'll talk about strategy and tactics, I think, fairly quickly. And I'll just say the way he says it. He says strategy. He says he's concerned with the leadership of armies before action. That is, with the bringing them into action in a fashion best calculated to give them advantage when contact with the enemy shall have been taken. So, making sure your team has an advantage once the action starts, and you're working before the action starts, before your team is doing the work, whatever that is. Working with a customer, working with a client, doing some internal work that helps the organization, whatever it is. You're making sure that team has that advantage before they start. So I think a number of things we talk about fall into that category of, roughly speaking, strategy, as he calls it.
Oh yeah, yeah. The idea of in the ancient times, yeah, I'm an army on foot. I'm going to fight an army that's using horses and wheeled chariots.
Yep,
I'm going to take them out into soft, marshy ground.
exactly.
And
I'm going to split my forces into two and do a hammer and anvil.
mm-hmm. So yeah, the strategy, yeah, using all available resources.
Yeah.
How can I put my men in a position to win? Fighter pilots would do that. They would attack
Yes.
with the sun at their back, so the enemy looking at them couldn't see them clearly because the sun was in their eyes.
Right. We're going to attack the other team's supply lines. I mean, there are a number of strategic moves we could make, and in fact, we still use the doggone word, right? Strategic planning. That's a good portion of the work we do. In ensuring we make use of our strengths and opportunities, right? Addressing our weaknesses and our threats. We talk about the SWOT analysis. I think we've done an episode on that. That could be one example of how we deal with strategic thinking at an organizational level, and a leader needs to do that. A leader needs to be participating in strategy. So there's strategy. Is that fair enough to you? Anything you'd add to that?
Oh no, that makes perfect sense. And so the strategy would be augmented by the tactics.
That's right. And I know there's not a single American male who is listening to this podcast who hasn't. I mean, as soon as we said strategy, they immediately said tactics because we've all watched a war documentary and loved it. Every one of us, every red-blooded one of us. But he's the way he puts it is, that we've talked about strategy. He says he's also concerned with the maneuver of his men after contact has been established and when and after the action has been begun. This is tactics. So, if strategy is making sure your team has an advantage when the action starts, putting them at an advantage, tactics is coordinating your team after the action starts. Now, I think this one's a little more challenging for us because I think there's a temptation in modern days to say, well, a modern leader doesn't really coordinate that much. He leaves it to his people, but empowerment and so on. We'll get there. We're going to talk about that. But I think you could think about things like coaching from the sidelines, right? Like even while my team is involved in the work, I'm still coaching from the sidelines. It's not like I strategically plan stuff and then say, have at it, guys. I got to go do paperwork. You're still involved in the work and you're helping along with the work. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. You see, there's a boxer. He's in the ring. they're pummeling each other, and the people from their corners are shouting out tactics.
Yes.
Go to the
Yes.
body, move around more, stay off the ropes. All these tactics that
Yeah.
once it's in the midst of battle, there are adjustments to the approach, which he calls tactics.
That's well said, and it leads to the third one because, as I said, he calls it organization, um, and it's really interesting. He basically says that throughout, but especially as he's thinking about strategy and maybe even before strategy, he says the great leader is concerned with rendering his forces as efficient as may be for their purposes. And with that object, he must be an organizer. He must put in their right order the various factors which make for efficiency of every kind. And so we could go on and on about this, right? What does your team need? What are the he calls them the necessaries? What's the avenue and rate of their delivery? He says, how are we going to get stuff to them and how often? Maintenance of their health, the machinery for disembarrassing the armed organization of waste. Yeah, getting rid of the poop and stuff, and maintaining it continually and fully supplied. I mean, nowadays we'd call it logistics, is what I would probably say, right? In terms of a military capacity. But I think there's something to be said here about the fact that even before you begin strategic thinking, there's almost like pre-strategy. If strategic thinking is making sure you're prepared, then this idea of organization is preparing to prepare. There are some things you have to do to prepare. And we talk about this on the podcast all the time, right? You better prioritize what the factors are so that you're dealing with them. You ought to make sure you figure out what the structures are that will dictate the behaviors you want to see. And some of those need to be built in, such as your own structures. What's your morning routine, right? We could talk about a number of different ways that you have to be organized and have a system to make sure that the things get accomplished that need to get accomplished so your team has what they need. So
Yeah.
maybe I'm blowing that out of proportion, but that's how I see it.
Oh, no. You look at a lot of your battles, your World War II battles, and where the enemy was advancing rapidly until they ran out of fuel.
Yep.
And they were moving so fast the fuel supplies couldn't keep up. And you look at General Patton and the Red Ball Express.
Yep.
The 2.5 ton, the deuce and a half supply trucks were, he said, just as important as the fighting man.
Yep.
To success. And so these guys just having an insane, there was stories that the trucks never stopped. The drivers would drive for 10 hours, they would get out, another driver would get in, that guy would sleep, and the next guy would take it another 10 hours forward. And
that's it.
So yeah, the trucks never quit rolling so that the army could continue its engagement.
Yeah, and supply lines have won how many battles, right? I mean, just in general. And and when I think of it in terms of the modern organization, I could kind of go through that list again, right? What are the necessaries? What are the things we need? How often are we going to give it to them, and how are we going to get it to them, right? So you could stop there and talk about training. How are we going to do our training? How often is the training going to happen? What are the delivery mechanisms for our training? We could talk about how we do health, maintenance of health, right? We've talked a lot on this podcast and in our workshops about mental health and making sure you're checking in with your people on a regular basis. We could talk about safety, right? That a lot of the modern process improvement methods, a lot of them do come back to talking about first safety, right? When you're dealing with a factory or something like that. And I think that is maybe it's not stated enough that there are some things that our people need, and it's one of the questions on your respect-based performance coaching system is, basically to say, what can I provide, right? As your manager, what can I do to help you on this thing you're trying to achieve?
Hmm.
If we're not regularly asking that, if we're not regularly tracking our people on how they're doing, the data and so on, scoreboards. I mean, all of this is organization, and it's putting us in a place where we can now do some strategic thinking and be ready to execute some tactics when the time comes. But you have to have these systems set up first.
Hmm.
That's
Well,
my thinking.
no, I think you're spot on, and having the forethought of thought this through, just as important as whatever happens in the battle.
Yes.
And so, in uh, as Mike Tyson says,
Yep.
everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And so,
Interesting. That's 2 days in a row that quote has come up.
yeah. So the idea that yeah, I know it's going to change,
Right.
but I'm better having had a plan than going into it with no plan.
I,
Even though the plan and the organization is going to be met with unforeseen circumstances, I'm better off having thought some of these things through ahead of time.
yes. I think that's spot on. And I don't my feeling is that we probably don't spend enough time here or we get stuck here. I think one of those two things happened. And so it's interesting because it's again, it sort of leads into the fourth quality. He listed those three qualities: tactician, strategist, organizer. And then I'm going to quote him here because this is, we'll go back and pick it apart. I've got it sort of listed out so it's easier to follow, sort of bullet point style. But let me just read this because he waxes somewhat eloquently, and I think we're going to end up having to argue with him a little bit on this. But let me just read it. He says, "These three qualities of the organizer, the tactician, the strategist must all of them be leavened and raised to their highest power through a fourth factor present in each and all, the faculty of command." He says this. Now, this term, the faculty of command, is one impossible of definition. You can't even define this thing, though, of course, it is the essential of the whole. You can't define it, but you have to have it. Okay, well, that's interesting. He says it includes so obvious a thing as a right judgment in the choice of subordinates, an instinctive judgment also between the right and wrong moment for an order, a reprimand, a confidence. But its true potential, the inner thing which gives it all its value, is some quality in the man which communicates his energy to inferiors, his direct reports, anybody below him, causes it to flow throughout every unit of his command down to the individual private soldier, and brings forth in unison those apparently contradictory things, responsibility and obedience, leaving exactly the right degree of freedom to subordinates. Of this essential and, as it were, transcendental quality, power of command, no analysis is possible. Nothing can be said of it save affirmation. It is present or it is not present, and none can tell you why. Isn't that great?
That is, yeah, that's beyond profound. Yeah.
Impossible to define, but it's also essential, and also it's transcendent to everything we've just talked about. It's through the whole thing. And
Oh, yeah.
it made me think of what was the Supreme Court justice said? He said, "I can't define obscenity, but I know it when I see it." It's
Right.
sort of like that. Like this leadership. Like you'll know when it's real leadership.
Oh,
So
yeah. Yeah. As Shakespeare, said something similar. Yeah, as the whole world was to say, and that is a man.
yeah, that's
Like
right.
you just know. Yeah, yeah.
That's
The whole
right.
world knows. Yeah. So, yeah, when in energy, instinct,
Yeah,
like these massively vague terms.
yeah. He gives some tells. He says right judgment of subordinates. Okay, well, define right, but basically, uh, you know, picking out who's going to be, your folks you delegate to. That's When you see that, you'll know leadership's happening. Instinctive judgment on timing. Okay, that's pretty vague too, right? Timing
Mhm.
on giving an order, giving a reprimand, and trusting somebody else. Maybe with a confidence,
Oh,
trusting them with a secret.
yeah, and you think about there's a book, The Dichotomy of Leadership,
Yes.
and he speaks of that, right? So he says you must have obedience and give them freedom.
Right.
Like, all right, so there must be obedience, and then they need freedom. Freedom.
That's right. Well,
Okay. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he says that's the
What?
real value. It's the transfer of energy to those under him or her so that everybody is both responsible and obedient and therefore has the right degree of freedom. I'm going to obey, but I'm also responsible and I'm going to take this very seriously. I I think he's defining employee engagement,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
right?
Well, the Marines are that way. They have very, very strict training,
Yep.
and they have their certain commands that they, these rules that govern everything they do. And then they also have the idea of one of those rules is you must be able to adapt and overcome.
Right.
So we will never be able to give you all the answers that you're going to, for the situations you're going to run into in the field. And so when you're out there within these parameters, figure it out
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make it happen, get to the objective. And so yeah, there's tremendous obedience. Right. I've got very specific rules that if I violate, I could be court-martialed, I could be shot.
Yep.
At the same time, they want me to figure out how to get the job done given those parameters. And I'm free to do that in whatever way I see fit.
Spot on. And we would talk in our day and age about empowerment, right? Uh and that's I think what we're talking about here is someone who knows just the right amount of decision making under their uh, uh, control as somebody down the line of the chain of command, saying I'm going to absolutely follow orders and I'm going to customize it to whatever I see in the moment that I need to adapt to. That's the freedom I have, is to make that work. Um, so yeah, it's funny because you and I were talking about how this morning I was putting up hay, and my son Simon went with me. He wanted to go. He got up
Well,
early.
clarify that. He didn't want to go put up hay.
I'm gonna tell you, I don't think he knew what that meant, but he had been
Yeah,
up
yeah,
for a while.
yeah, yeah. Nobody, even people who've seen it on TV, don't know what putting up hay really is.
Well, and let's just look at the weather. For it's 90 degrees right now. So we went at we started at 7:30. So it was, yeah, we were we were in the 80s for sure, and it's pretty humid right now. We're in a heat wave, um, and he was a little bored, and he had gotten up and he wanted to go do something, and he did. By golly, he really put his nose to the grindstone, and he was hauling bales as much as his smaller frame would allow him, and was helping out a ton. Um, After it was over, 2 hours later, he said that was so fun. What? It was so fun, Dad. Well, what was so fun about it? He's like, well, and he mentioned a couple things about, I got to see my cousin and, my uncle and, yada yada. But he said, but I wanted to do it. I said, yeah, yeah, you wanted to do it. That's a big, big insight. I said, hey, which of your chores at home is your favorite? And he said, I don't like my chores. I don't want to do them. There it is, right? There it is. Obedience and freedom, right? I am going to have to figure out a way that I want to do this. And in the case of an organization, it's communicating the energy down, right? It's leadership saying, guys, this is what we can get totally psyched about. Come with us. We have a vision of where we want to go. We've got a plan. We're organized. We know where we're headed. And we'd like you to want to do your job.
Oh yeah, yeah. What are our more modern cliche on that is speed of the leader, speed of the pack.
Yeah.
And so same thing. The energy of the leader is the energy of the pack.
Yes.
And so yeah, if I believe that this is possible and I get others to follow in that energy and belief, yeah, the whole thing moves forward.
So now let's talk about it because I mean he sort of apply. I feel like Hilaire Belloc is implying that some people just have this, right? They just have this power of command. And is he right? Like, is some of this just it's just impossible to define? We won't be able to nail this down enough to where we can say, hey, let's take that private and turn him into a general, and he'll be able to communicate his energy to inferiors and cause it to flow through every unit of his command. You know, like is this just you're born with it?
Well, the great man theory of leadership would
Hmm.
postulate that that is the case.
Right.
More modern theories of leadership believe that it is a learned skill. And yeah, and there are absolutely people who are born and even have certain genetic traits that make it easier to do and learn these things.
Yep.
But as we've seen, right, it is a skill that once practiced, you can become the master of. You can become a great leader.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is by attention to that, right? So the idea that all great leaders are readers. Uh,
Yep.
if I'm willing to study, like in this case, right, you've got somebody who was studying another leader to try and figure out his, how to be a better leader.
Right.
And if I'm willing to do that and to try those things and to learn from my mistakes, yeah, there's no reason in the world I can't become a great leader.
Yeah, you're hitting on a couple things that I think are really important. He says it is present or it is not present, and none can tell you why. Right? Like that's his line. It's such a good line. But I think what you're saying is that there are skills, plural, that
Mm-hmm.
make up great leadership. And I think he gives you a hint at some of them, right? That it's learning instinct of judgment on uh, timing, on the right and wrong moment for the actions you do as a leader. You can, instinct is you can be born with it, but you can also develop that. Judgment and the choice of subordinates. You can learn who and how to delegate to. Those are skills, right? And there's certainly skills we teach in our workshops. Um, this energy thing, right? That I'm going to communicate my energy. I mean, you and I both know it. Some people are energy makers. Some people are energy drainers. Some people don't change the temperature of the room when they come in. Others do. Can they get better at that? Well, I think maybe the real characteristic here, and it's going to seem counterintuitive, is humility. Because if you're not willing to learn, perhaps from other great men, quote unquote, right? If you're not willing to study others and see what you could do to adjust your system based on the success of others, if you don't have that characteristic, you might be doomed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but but you could learn a lot of these things if you're willing to be open and learn that, and that takes humility. You have to have
Oh,
humility to do that.
oh yeah. And I'm a firm believer that those who are doing it at the highest level are the ones that are most unable to communicate how they do it.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you get these people, it's kind of like if Michael Jordan was your basketball coach
right.
and he's like he's got, this new guy and he's like, "All right, so you get the ball at the top of the key and then you stick your tongue out
Right.
and then you kind of move and go and then go and move and then the ball goes in the hoop.
Right.
All right,
Right.
now you do it."
You do it.
Yeah, like what? Yeah, that's not helpful. but somebody who it doesn't come natural to, who's a student of the game, would study and figure out what are the components, what are the ways to break this down so that it is teachable, it is learnable,
Right.
and somebody else can emulate that, maybe not to that nth degree, but they become much better than they currently are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good place to stop, because, what we're basically suggesting here is that, what will improve your leadership, right? Here are 4 factors, and each of them have kind of a list, right? Do you need to work on strategy? Do you need to work on your planning on what your team needs to be in its best position? Do you need better tactics? Do you need to be coaching from the sidelines? Do you need to be doing things to help your people make adjustments in the moment? Or is it something more foundational like organization, where you need to decide, are my people getting the resources that they need at the right time in the right way? Am I checking in on them on how things are going, and their mental health, their physical health, their ability to perform, and do I have systems in place that allow me to do that as much as allow them to have access to everything needed? And then command. There are some hints here. Making good judgments about your people, good instinct on timing, but it's that transferring energy down, and which of these things do you need to grow in so that your people are truly engaged and truly have that right degree of freedom and are both responsible and obedient at the same time. We can help you with any of this if you are willing to learn.
Oh, definitely. And the first step in your leadership journey would be to smash that like button
So
and or
true.
subscribe.
That is so true.
Yeah, that there begins the great leadership journey.
That's right.
And if you think you need a more advanced tutorial, then we're happy to help.
We would indeed. And I will say that, we do this a lot. We don't talk about it in this way, but I think it's a good way to think about it, that you need some sort of framework before you go to battle. And so this is a 4-point framework, and it helps you sort through your, what do I have, what do I not have? And we'd love to help you get some coaching around it and take the next step.
Perfect. I like it. Yes,
Yeah.
we would. All right, great job. Thanks for bringing that to the forefront. I know your students have given you an honorary doctorate. They call you
What?
Professor.
Oh, Professor Fish.
Yeah, Professor Fish. We'll leave that as a cliffhanger. Someday maybe we'll find out.
I would have to find out first, Mike. I don't have a clue. Stuff happens.
And there you have it. Another session of contemporaneous extemporizing from Mark and Mike. I know it's redundant, but consider who we're talking about. As always, feel free to share the ideas you heard here. No rights are reserved, no permissions needed. Thanks. See you next time on It Doesn't Take a Genius.
That's good enough.